Hey guys, and welcome to my special project video. My name's Eddie, as I'm expecting you to know, and I will be talking about bird migration, so avian dispersal, how they migrate, and really how amazing it is for what they do. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get right to it. So, bird migration. Migration is a thing that happens for most species of birds, for 90% of the species out there, twice a year. Once north, and then once south again. Sometimes they're only going 200-300 miles, 25-30 miles. Some don't migrate far at all. But then others migrate close to 15,000 miles, 10,000 miles a year just to go from wintering to breeding, or from breeding to wintering grounds. That's how far and hard these birds, some maybe the size of my pencil, and some just a little bit bigger than this memory card, migrate just to survive. Because imagine all these little birds, warblers, hummingbirds, sparrows, trying to survive the winter in some of these harsh areas is really hard on their bodies. So, when God created the world, He did something about it. And that's why we have migration. Migration is when a species or a single bird, such as this piping plover right here, migrates a significant amount of ground just to either get to their breeding grounds or their wintering grounds. This piping plover right here was taken Montrose Beach in Chicago, Illinois. This bird wintered. It has two bands. It was banded by people in South Florida on Miami Beach. It's going to breed in northern Michigan on the UP. So imagine that flight. That's a short flight compared to some other birds, such as the Arctic tern, which migrates 15,000 to 20,000 miles a year. Imagine that. That's insane. Just try to do that. Try to walk that far even. You won't get very far before you get tired. Before we get into this whole bird migration thing, before we get into the types of migrations, I'm going to go over what we call flyways here in the U.S. These are not exact. Most birders do not use these, but for beginning birders, as an idea, it helps to know. So here in the U.S. we have four major flyways. We have the Atlantic, Mississippi, Central, and Pacific. Now, the reason we have these flyways is because of mountains. In the Atlantic, the Appalachians divide. They divide where the birds go. So, west of the Appalachians is almost all Mississippi, and east of the Appalachians is all Atlantic. Now, there's some, obviously, a lot of birds don't follow that. A lot of birds do follow that. It's kind of a balanced thing. Then there's the Mississippi, which is the central U.S., so from like Kentucky to Missouri. Then there's the Central, which is from Missouri to just past Salt Lake City, right through Utah, and then Pacific from there west. So those are the four major flyways here. And not all birds follow them, as I said, but there are two major things. It's the mountains, the Appalachian and the Rocky Mountains. Now, I talked about the Appalachians, but the Rocky Mountains are the main migratory divide. We have species here such as Bullock's oriole and Baltimore oriole. They used to be called northern oriole, but because of the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, any birds west of the Rocky Mountains are Bullock's orioles. No, Bullock's orioles, correct. Any birds east of the Rocky Mountains are Baltimore orioles. They have almost the same exact genetics, they just look different. And then same with western and eastern bluebird. Western, west of there, east of there, they look different. Lazuli and indigo bunting. All these birds, in areas that their ranges somewhat overlap, they do hybridize sometimes. But just to show you how significant the Rocky Mountains are in birding, in avian dispersal and migrations. So here's a quick picture I will show you on the flyways. So if you can see this, we have 4 flyways here. We have the Atlantic, and birds do fly over the Atlantic. A lot of warblers do fly when they're migrating for fall migration over the Atlantic Ocean. So we have the Atlantic Ocean here, and the Atlantic Flyway here. It's not an exact map, this is just kind of an idea. The Mississippi Flyway, you can see it overlaps here. All 3 of these overlap up in Canada. The Mississippi Flyway comes straight through here and goes over the Gulf. The Central Flyway through Texas, and this is the main hawk route. Hawks, when they come here and go straight through Texas, South Texas, all the way down. And then the Pacific route goes along the Pacific coast, obviously. So these are just to give you an idea of the different flights of birds. So, yeah. Now let's get into what types of migrations there are. So now that I have explained migration and the meaning of migration, I will get into the different types of migration, which is what my project is about. So the most common type of migration is called obligative migration. Obligative migration is when a bird of a particular species, we're going to take example the Arctic tern, very well known, migrates to the same exact nesting area and wintering area every year for 5 to 10 years, or however long that bird lives. So, when they are born, they fly to Antarctica. That's where they're going to winter, and it's technically the summer there, so that's why they go there. So, they winter down there, and then they fly back up to right around where they were born, and they breed there, and then go right back to where they winter. That is an obligative migrant. These migrants, probably 70% of all birds are obligative migrants. Some are also migrants which go backwards, like they will start in South America, and for winter they'll migrate north, which is pretty interesting actually if you think of it. And that's called migratory divides. So just take that into perception, because when you're going to the same exact place, imagine trying to remember the same exact place 15,000 miles away, and you have to get there by yourself. You don't have Waze, you don't have maps. I mean, they fly, and Arctic terns, they'll keep flying for as long as they can. Just imagine, I'm saying imagine a lot, but just imagine getting from California to somewhere in southern Arkansas, Texarkana, Arkansas. Try getting there without GPS, without maps, without anything like that. Just try thinking of that. That's what they do. They use the sky. They use their own resources. If we had to do this, we would use the sky too, but we don't really need to use the sky. Back in 2008, 2 white-crowned sparrows were taken from their wintering grounds in California. These had been geolocated, like they had geolocators on their back, which were little things, little devices, probably the size of my pinky nail, and they track where the birds go for about 1.5 to 2 years when they die, and they'll fall off their back. And you'll be able to track to get there. It'll just have enough life to send you location of where it is when it's still. So they were geolocate tagged in California in their wintering grounds. Their breeding grounds, they breed all the way up in Alaska, in very tip of Alaska, northern Alaska. And when they migrated back to Northern California, and this is a park in Sacramento, they were banded, they were captured, banded, and taken, 1 to Maryland and 1 to Arkansas, and let go. Now, since white-crowned sparrows are region-wide, like I saw one earlier today when I was birding, they're all over across America during spring and fall migration, and in some areas winter and summer. These birds, in 2.5 or 3 weeks, had made it all the way back to California to breed. Not to breed, to winter. They flew all the way back. They knew where to go for winter. That is the amazing thing about obligative migrants, is they know where they're supposed to go. They remember. And even though they had never seen that part, never had they gone to the east, that we know of. Those birds had never gone to the east, because they just fly up and down the Pacific. They somehow found their way back. They knew where to go. They saw the stars, and they followed the stars there. I mean, I just think that's amazing. It's really cool. Now that we have talked about obligative migration, we are going to move on to facultative migration. And facultative migration is when birds migrate only under a special condition, such as shortage in food supply, or weather, bad air. Just those are some examples. So, an example of a species that does this, or actually more of a group, finches. Goldfinches, pine siskins, crossbills, and grosbeaks. There's pine and evening grosbeaks. They're called grosbeaks, but they're actually finches. Ornithologists are crazy at naming birds. It's pretty interesting. But so I live in northern Illinois, and that's at the very edge of where most of the winter finches come to. So in order to get a good winter finch year, we have to have Ontario, Minnesota, Wisconsin, any of those Canadian countries in north of us, anything, has to have a bad crop season. Because pine siskin, crossbill, grosbeaks, they all eat pine cones, like the pine seeds. So if there's a really bad crop year, and they can tell, then we start getting excited, because then we put out our thistle feeders. The crossbills will come to thistle feeders. They'll be flying around in different locations. They'll be more common. But I haven't seen a red crossbill in Cook County in almost 3 years. And this year, they were everywhere. Literally everywhere. Every stand-up pines you went to had one. And I hadn't seen one before that, since 2015. So that's what a facultative migrant is. It doesn't happen a whole heck of a lot. There's not a lot of birds that affects. But this is one species that really, actually one type of species that's how they migrate, that's how they live. They nest, they do some obligative migration, like they would do nest farther up north, some of them, and then come south, and they'll migrate east to west. But unless there is a shortage in crop or food supply, they will not come down farther than their normal range. Now we are going to talk about a migration that is fairly similar to facultative migration. And this is called nomadic migration. Nomadic migrations, as you can tell, they got their names from the nomads, are birds that kind of wander around. So the grosbeaks, finches, crossbills, they all wander around. That's kind of what their point is. They wander around in search of food. But in facultative migration, the difference between facultative and nomadic is when facultative forces them. Like, there's no food, they need to come south because that's where the food is. The weather's better down here. Nomadic migration doesn't exactly mean they are leaving and coming south. Normally what it is it's a group of birds, they stay in somewhat of the same area, but they just migrate around that whole area looking for food, and mainly food. A good example of it is Bohemian waxwing. They do some obligative migration. They will come close to, from Alaska or northern Canada all the way down to the upper peninsula of Michigan or northern Wisconsin, Minnesota. That's about as far as they'll get. That's actually the limit on as far as they'll get. They don't venture much farther out. But if you put a tag on a group of those birds, they will migrate just during their winter, probably close to 1,000 miles, just going back and forth, just looking for food supply in the UP of Michigan. They are just going back and forth in circles. They'll find a cranberry tree or something, completely maul it, move on to the next one. That's what they do. And that's what a nomadic migration is. And normally also, nomadic migrants aren't just single birds. It's groups of 50, 100, 200 birds all together in one group that are looking for a food source. So now that you've learned the three main types of migration, we will move on to the lesser, more interesting types of migration that happen sometimes seasonally and sometimes never. So, let's see. One really cool thing I wanted to throw in about nomadic migrants is some of them are swifts. And if you don't know what a swift is basically a swallow that flies. It's got a really cigar-shaped body, aerodynamic, just like a freak in the air, insanely crazy, dive bombing, like just they're fast, quick, and kind of inspiring in some way. So they did research on a swift called an alpine swift in the Himalayas, and this alpine swift that they put a geolocator on traveled for 6 straight months after fledging, leaving the nest fledging. Imagine flying 6 straight months. Eats on the air, eats on the wing, drinks on the wing, sleeps on the wing. That is insane. 6 straight months. You don't take rest. 6 months of flying. And it's, I don't know what to say. Imagine running for 6 months straight. Alright? Just go ahead, take your 6-month jog. That's crazy. How do you do that? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, sometimes you'll get like that extra adrenaline to go run that extra mile. This thing needs adrenaline to get itself from summer to halfway through winter when they reach their breeding grounds to rest. And they're fast too. It's not like they're just like going in circles and circles and circles. They do go in circles and circles and circles, but their breeding grounds they could get to in like 4 or 5 days, but they can't. They just, nobody knows why, they just don't. They take forever to get there. But I just want to share that with you because I think that's really cool about nomadic migrants. They are technically obligated migrants, but for the first 6 months of their life, or 6 months after the breeding season, they're nomadic. So, just something for you to think about. So here's a totally different migration that is not nomadic, not obligative, a little bit facultative, but just kind of different in general. It's called altitudinal migration. This is more of a migration for Central and South American birds, because in Central and South America, the elevation is what tells a species, well, the elevation is what divides species. When I was in Ecuador this past summer, you could drive 10 minutes up, and it looks the same, except there's more clouds up there. You just went from the temperate to the cloud forest. We were seeing booted racketails in the temperate forest. We went up to the cloud forest. We still saw them. We went up a little higher than the cloud forest. About 3/4 way through it, nothing. They cut off around 3,500 meters. That's it. That's where they're done. There's tons of birds in Central and South America that as soon as they hit that line, they do not cross it. There is, I cannot remember, it's a sun angel of some sort, which is a hummingbird. And we went to these people's house in Ecuador. They live, I think it's at 7,500 feet. I said meters before, I'm confusing you. At 9,000 feet, which is about a 10-minute drive up the road, they have the sun angel there. They have had it once in 15 years. Once. Just like a 15-minute drive. Most birds will fly 15 minutes, and that's going to take them like 5 minutes, actually. Just once have they had it, though. That's crazy. You would never expect that. But it does happen. Stuff like that does happen. So, here in the U.S., our altitudinal migration is forced because of cold weather. There, it's because of breeding season and wintering season, food normally, and rain. Lots of rain in the cloud forest during the winter. Lots. I mean, there's lots of rain everywhere, but the cloud forest and the rainforest have the most rain. So the temperate zone in the middle doesn't have as much. It still has a lot more than we are used to here, but that's where most of the birds go. There's more insects there, more fruit, whatever they eat. Here in the U.S., all the altitudinal migration is escaping cold weather. So white-tailed ptarmigan, for example, which is like a chicken, it's actually called the winter chicken because in the winter, ptarmigans, they turn white to blend in with the snow. So during the winter, excuse that, my computer's messing up, I don't know why, they come maybe 1,000 feet lower to just that tree line. During the summer, they're all the way above tree line, like way at the top of the mountains in the alpine meadows. During the winter, they come to tree line because that's where the snow is less, there's more shelter, so they're not just getting beat up by 150, 200 mile per hour winds constantly. Or actually 50 to 100 mile per hour winds constantly. So there aren't that many altitudinal migrants in the U.S. That's probably one of the main ones. Rosy finches also, that's another one. Gray-crowned black and brown-capped rosy finches all migrate down, I'd say 5,000, 6,000 feet during the winter, so that there'll be food. They live at the high alpine meadows during the summer and migrate all the way down to feeders, people's feeders, and just areas where there's tons of food during the winter, which normally is about 7,000 feet. So it's not as harsh, weather's not as harsh, not as windy. A good reference I like to use for the rosy finches is in Colorado at Rocky Mountain National Park. At Rocky Mountain National Park, during the summer, the rosy finches are anywhere above tree line, which is 11,986 feet, I believe. Can't remember that for sure. Anywhere above tree line, that's where they live during the summer. During the winter, anywhere below tree line, especially feeders and especially feeders. They will flock to feeders in numbers up to 1,000, and they will stay there the whole entire time, whole entire winter, feeding constantly. Different feeders, like there's some feeders in Estes Park, Colorado, that just get absolutely mobbed by rosy finches, and they go through a ridiculous amount of seed every day. Like I think it's like 30 pounds of seed every day. It's a lot of seed for a bird that weighs less than 5 ounces. So that's just an example of an altitudinal migrant that moves up to down that we have in the U.S. That's the biggest altitudinal migrant that we have in the U.S. are the rosy finches, brown-capped, gray, and black. Now that we have covered all the different migrations, we are going to move on to some more interesting facts about some birds that migrate. So we're going to start with a somewhat migration, but it's kind of a different sort of one. So it's called a migratory divide. That's when it's the same species, no subspecies difference, they're the same exact DNA, but they migrate to different areas in the winter and during the summer. So the bird that we're going to be looking at is willow warbler. Now, willow warblers actually are very dull, small, about this big, and they live in Russia, Sweden, Norway, all the way up there. So this is the map. Alright? If you can see this is the map of willow warblers. Now, this right here is a 63-degree lateral line mark. Those dots. That means that the birds north of there all migrate to Eastern Africa, Eastern and Southern Africa. So they go all the way out over here, over the Red Sea, somewhat over the Mediterranean, probably a lot of them do. But they go here. Now, about 100 km south of there is the 60-degree line. And the birds, they migrate to Western Africa. So all the way, not sure if you can see that, all the way down here. And that's just a 3-degree lateral difference. From here, all the way to here, and there to here. That's it. They, as you can tell, they don't cross anywhere over here. This is like the line. Oops. This is the line. None of the no, they don't go over there. The ones from 60 degrees and under don't go over to Eastern Africa, and the ones from 63 degrees and above don't go to Western Africa. So that's just how unique some birds are. Just 3 degrees of lateral difference, and that's the change. That's what can happen. There's not many birds like that in the world. The only other bird that I can think of, there's probably some, but I just don't know them, is the northern wheater, and that's location based. Northern wheaters, they breed in, there's two areas that they breed. One is in Alaska. Second one in New Brunswick, in Canada. They breed, those are the only 2 areas that they breed in the world. They also breed up here and over here, obviously. But if they're in western, like west of the central U.S., of the Mississippi River, if they're west of the Mississippi River, they have to migrate all the way across the Bering Sea, across all of Russia, through the Middle East, and all the way down to Western Africa, the same area that the willow warblers go. Now, if they are east of the Mississippi River, they fly directly across the Atlantic Ocean to the United Kingdom, and then from the United Kingdom all the way down to Western Africa. And this migration for them takes about a month and a half. This one does. It takes about half a month for them doing this one. But those are just 2 examples of migratory divides and what different climate or different level of lateral lines have to do with it. It's pretty interesting. So this is the last thing I will talk about in this. Migrating raptors. So I wanted to share this with you because they have a very interesting way of migrating. Raptors do not like to fly over water. Some have to. The ones that migrate through Florida to Cuba have to. But if they can at all costs, they will avoid it, even if it adds an extra 2,000 miles to their trip. So, for some hawks, such as Swainson's hawk, peregrine falcon, I count that as a hawk, or a raptor in this, Mississippi kite, swallow-tailed kite, turkey vultures, black vultures, and multiple others. They need to migrate to get down to their wintering grounds in Central and South America. So they have a very unique way of doing it. Instead of migrating over the ocean, they all migrate right down the coast of Mexico. This is a very small population that does this. It's not large, but they migrate all the way down through here. So all the raptors, red-shouldered hawk, broad-winged hawks, that are in the East Coast, they come all the way over and come down. So there's a place called Veracruz in Mexico. And this Veracruz, which is right here, on an average day, has 2 to 7 million hawks pass through. 2 to 7 million. Can you imagine seeing like 200 hawks at once? Well, imagine like the whole sky is filled with them. There were it's crazy the amount of hawks that they have there. And it's only in spring and fall migration that they pass through, and it's to get to their wintering grounds. Like for some, Swainson's hawk, it's all the way southern tip of Argentina. That's where they winter. So they have a long trip, and this is where they kind of all bottleneck together and go through Costa Rica, Panama, and then they start to separate once they get to Colombia. And they try to avoid the rainforest at all costs. But yeah, so this is how hawks migrate. And I would say right now that if we were to go to Veracruz right now at this moment, we would see close to 700,000 raptors today. That's how many raptors are migrating right now at this moment. But yeah, so that's all I have for migrating raptors. Hope you liked that. Pretty cool fun fact. Alright, well thank you for watching this video and learning a few things about birds and their migrations in general. I hope you guys like this, and I'll see you guys at biology class, just as my light dies. Alright, oh, there it is again. Bye.